Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And if you guys don't know, if you're just joining my channel, Storycraft is where I tell you guys a story while you watch me craft. And I am always taking requests for stories, so if there's a story you would like to hear on the channel, you can leave it in the comments below and let me know. That's all I really have to say before we jump into this one. Today, as evidenced by the title and the thumbnail and all the things you clicked on to get here, we're talking about King Midas, and I am really excited to share this one with you guys. I think it's a fairly well-known story. It's probably one of the more popular stories to come out of, like, Ovid's Metamorphosis, but I'm going to tell it because it's an enjoyable story. I enjoy it. Also, somebody requested it, and I am really sorry off the top. I don't remember who requested this story, but I wrote your request on my list of requests, so it made it here. But if it was you who requested it, just let me know. I can't remember who asked for this story. But we're just going to jump into it. So, of course, this story takes place in ancient Greece, more specifically in the kingdom of Phrygia, because that is the city, or the country, the nation that King Midas was the king of. He was the king of Phrygia. And King Midas, interestingly, was the son of the queen of Phrygia, Cybele, but also Zeus. So Midas is actually a demigod himself. Surprise, surprise. Zeus made another child. So the story doesn't really have like a good introduction, so we're just going to start in the way long ago, where we're going to meet our hero, maybe, question marks, King Midas, on the road, returning home from whatever kingly bullshit he was doing before. And on the way back, he stumbles across a little tiny satyr guy, you know, a satyr who half man, half goat, named Silenus, who was head like down, bottoms up in a bush, passed out drunk. Absolutely wasted. So Silenus got super wasted and then just fell over in a bush and passed out. And Midas was like, "Aw, poor little guy." So he takes him home. Basically to help nurse him back to health. But also, once Silenus recovers from the massive hangover you know he had, King Midas is like, "Hey, you're my guest, wanna celebrate?" And turns out they had a great time. They had 10 days of partying, 10 days and nights of feast, banquets, drinking, partying, all the things. And it was wonderful. They had a fantastic time. So the sources here differ on whether or not King Midas actually knew who Silenus's best buddy was or not. I like to go with the idea that maybe he didn't know, and this was a genuine act of kindness where he was just like, "Hey, this little satyr guy is actually a lot of fun, and he's a guest in my house, and I want to show him a good time." And he showed him a great time, because he showed him such a good time that the party god himself, Dionysus, showed up at his door and was like, "Hey, heard you're partying with my best friend." Because turns out Silenus and Dionysus were besties. And Dionysus was like, "You can't have a party with my bestie without me." And so Dionysus shows up and makes the party even greater, right? Because that's exactly his whole vibe. And so the 10 days of feasting turns into, like, a revelry, a proper bacchanal, like a huge, super huge party. And at the end of the party, when everything's sort of winding down, Dionysus turns to King Midas and he's like, "Hey, you took such good care of my bestie and you've been an excellent host. I'd like to give you a gift in return. So ask me for a favor, anything you want, I will grant it." And Midas is like, "Okay." Turns out, you guys, Midas has one particular vice, despite being a fairly nice guy who saves satyrs that are passed out drunk on the road. He has a vice, and it's the fact that he is greedy. Because let me describe to you, you guys, Phrygia, the kingdom, beautiful, gorgeous, amazing. Midas is one of the richest kings in history already at this point. We're talking like columns of gold, treasure everywhere, the people are wealthy, the economy is doing wonderful. Can't imagine what that's like. But Phrygia itself is abundant, it's prosperous, he's super well off already, and while he's looking at Dionysus, Midas, little greedy Midas, is like, "You know what would be better than being one of the richest kings in all of Greece? Is if I could be even richer?" And Dionysus is like, "Word, is that really what you want?" And he's like, "Yeah, I would like that everything I touch turned to gold. That's exactly what I want. I want everything I touch to turn to gold. And Dionysus is like, are you sure? And Midas is like, absolutely. That's exactly what I want. You said you would grant me any favor. This is the favor I would like. And Dionysus is like, all right, bro, like if that's what you want. So he does. He grants it to him. And then Dionysus fucks off with Silenus. They go hang out and do whatever party gods and satyrs do together, which is probably revel. And Midas is delighted, and he can't wait to try out his new gift. So he touches a cup. The cup turns to solid gold. He touches a plate. The plate turns to solid gold. Same thing with the fork, the spoon, the knives. He goes through all the cutlery. It all turns to gold. Then he goes around his palace. He starts touching things. The vases turn to gold. He gets out into the gardens. He touches the roses. They turn to solid gold. And he, just continues to, carry on around his entire palace, turning everything he can touch into gold. And he's sitting in his throne room thinking about what else he could touch to turn into gold when, his young daughter, they don't say how young, so somewhere in the, 6 to 9 range, I'm gonna imagine, she comes in. Her name is Zoe, and she is crying, absolutely bawling, because all the flowers are hard and they don't smell good anymore, and everything is ugly gold color, because gold is really pretty on its own, but when everything is gold, it's really ugly. It's too much, right? So she comes into the throne room. She is crying, tears pouring down her eyes, probably got that snot bubble going that kids can really work up, because everything is not as it used to be, and kids don't handle change very well, especially when it's a surprise. So she goes up to her dad, and her dad's like, oh my god, baby, what's wrong? And he reaches out to touch her, and she turns to solid gold. And Midas was surprised. He was really, really surprised. And then he was really, really upset, because as greedy as Midas is, he's also a really good dad. He's like a girl dad, right? And he loves his daughter. He loves her so much that he's like, this won't do. This is not going to work out for me. And he starts to panic a little bit, right? And it gets to the point where, he doesn't know what to do. He's sort of running around his castle a little bit. He gets to the kitchens, and he's like, okay, let me just get a small plate, something I can, eat to settle my stomach while I try to figure out how to turn my daughter back from a living statue of gold, or a solid statue of gold. We don't really know if she's living, right? So the servants bring him on a golden plate, because he touched all the dishware, a little snack, right, a little tapas, and he touches the food. It also turns to gold. He tries to take a drink of water, turns to gold. So the man cannot eat or drink anything, because everything he touches turns to gold, and his daughter is a golden statue, and he's like, this is balls. So then he's like, okay, I have to figure out how to get out of this, he runs out of the castle, touches everything on his way, because of course he does. He bumps into the servants, they turn to gold. He bumps into some merchant, turns to gold, right? And he's trying to avoid everybody, panicking as much as possible, and he basically makes it out into the grand courtyard and starts calling out for Dionysus in tears, and he's like, please help me, this is not what I want. He starts beating his chest, basically lamenting, but also praying to Dionysus for him to hear him in the first place, so that he can save him from this horrible situation. And Dionysus hears the prayers, of course, and he shows up, and he's like, hey, buddy, what's wrong? What's going on? You seem upset. And Midas is like, of course I'm upset. Everything I'm touching is turning to gold. And Dionysus is like, yeah, that's what you asked for. That's what you asked me for, and I asked you if you were sure, and you said yeah. So yeah, everything you touches turns to gold like you want. And he's like, yeah, but I can't eat and I can't drink. And Dionysus is like, yes, everything includes food and water. Yes, everything. Yes. And then Midas is like, yeah, but I also turned my daughter to gold. And Dionysus is like, yeah, she's also part of the everything. I don't see what the problem here is, buddy. And so Midas is like, please take it back. I don't want this. Please take your favor back. I'm very grateful for it. I'm not ungrateful, but I no longer wish to have it. And Dionysus thinks about it for a second, and since he's kind of a cool guy, he was like, all right, I guess you've suffered enough. This was a stupid wish, I want you to know. So what you're going to do, here's what you're going to do for me. You're going to go to the river, Pectolis, and wash your hands there. And whatever you put in the water should reverse the touch. So Midas is like, okay. So he takes off at a run, probably stumbling into more things, because he doesn't seem like a very stable, not clumsy guy. And he makes it to the river Pectolis, and he puts his hands into the water, and the powers that made everything gold, like, flow into the river, and all the sand along the river turns to gold. Which they say is why, to this day, the river was so rich in gold and electrum, which ends up becoming the money that future dynasties end up using, because there was a ton of gold in this river at one point in time. And it's all because of Midas washing his hands in the river. And as soon as he does, everything turns back to how it was before, including his daughter Zoe. She is returned to her original state. So when Midas gets back home, he's like relieved, he's overjoyed, he's crying happy tears. So he's like, thank God the place isn't ugly and garish looking anymore. This is really upsetting to me. Also, like, was I gold? That's weird. You should be more careful with your words, Dad. And he's like, you're absolutely right. And most places end the story of Midas right there. They live happily ever after, the end. But actually, there's another tale written by a different author. Some give it up to like Plutarch. I don't know how much like this actually ties in. It might be a different Midas. There's been a couple King Midases in history, but it seems like a good follow-up to this one. So I'm just gonna run through it really quick, the little ending of Midas's tale, because it turns out after seeing the negative of being a super greedy little like king when you have everything already, being greedier actually super turns him off. He actually grows to hate wealth and rejects that life entirely, and decides to just fuck off from his kingdom, like head out into the woods and become a follower of Pan, the god of the wild, like the wild, right? And also the god of satyrs. So like maybe Silenus was like, hey, have you tried this out? And he goes off to live like a quiet, peaceful life in the woods, right? Having sort of a soft country life. He even says that his tutor in music, because he decided to take up like a cool music tutor, like a music situation, like learns an instrument. He says his tutor was Orpheus, which I think Orpheus was a little busy, but maybe Orpheus had the time. If you would like me to tell you the myth of Orpheus, ask me. I think I maybe did it. I don't remember. I should look before I say things like this. If I haven't done it, ask me to do it if you're interested. But if I have done it, it's in the playlist. So at any rate, he's hanging out there, and he even gets like on good like graces, like in good touch with Pan. So him and Pan are also homies. So like Midas is cool to kick it with, you guys, because he makes friends everywhere he goes, even though he's a little greedy. So he's hanging out with Pan, and they're just hanging out, playing music, right? Hanging out, cool guys, doing stuff like that. And then Pan goes, I think, you know, I might be a better musician than Apollo. And, like, if these aren't high thoughts, I don't know what is. But I feel like they might have been a little high out there, because he says this into existence. And Apollo immediately hears this. He hears this, right? Because nobody can be better than Apollo at anything. And he shows up and he's like, bet. You think you're better at music than me, the literal god of music? Like, for real? So then they have like a music battle, right? And Apollo goes and grabs Timulus, the mountain god. I don't know of which mountain. I'm thinking maybe the mountain is Timulus. I need to look more into that. But he goes and grabs this mountain god to be the judge of this contest. And Midas is just hanging out there, like, watching his buddy go, like, a couple rounds in this epic rap battle with Apollo. And, you know, Pan plays his music, and it's very nice. It's very rustic. It's folksy. It's delightful music. It's the music of the country folk and the people out there, right? And then Apollo brings out his lyre, which, like, at this time in history, the lyre was like the electric guitar, right? So he's like a rock star. And he just absolutely goes to town on his lyre, and Timulus listens to both of them, and he goes, Apollo's the winner. And everyone's like, yeah, you're right, except for Midas, who was like, absolutely the fuck not. My best friend Pan, my buddy here, was clearly the winner. And then Apollo looks at him, And like, I didn't even know you were here, first of all. Who are you? Second of all, if you think that Pan played music better than me, then you must have the ears of an ass. And as he said it, Midas's ears became those of a donkey. That kind of ass. And, yeah, Apollo, like, fucks off. Pan's like, ooh, that hurt my vibe. He also fucks off. And Timos goes back to be in the mountain, and Midas is just stuck having donkey's ears. And he is so embarrassed, you know, he wears, like, a huge headdress, like, turban situation to cover it up, and he tries to keep it to himself, but eventually it comes time, he has to get his hair cut. But he doesn't want to take off his turban, because then his barber's gonna know he has donkey's ears underneath his turban. But how are you going to get a haircut, Midas, right? So he tells the barber, I'm going to show you what's underneath my turban here, but when you see it, you can't tell anybody. You have to swear not to tell anybody. I'm swearing you to secrecy. And the barber's like, yeah, totally. I'm great at keeping secrets. I'm actually the best person for secrets. So, you know, they remove the turban. He sees that Midas has a pair of donkey's ears, and he cuts his hair, says nothing. He stone cold face the entire time, makes no mention of it. But when he goes home that night, the barber, he is burning with this secret desire. Like, he has to tell somebody about the secret desire to tell the secret. And he decides what he's going to do is go outside to his backyard, dig up a hole into the ground, and then whisper the story into the hole. Right? Then he covers up the hole. He's like, okay, I've got it off my chest. I feel so much better. I at least told somebody. I told the earth, right? But what happens is, out of that little hole that he dug up and whispered the secret into, a bunch of reeds spring up. And then the reeds, these little fucking reeds, right? They start telling the story that King Midas has an ass's ears. And they keep just whispering it. And they're like, King Midas has an ass's ears. And every time somebody passes by, they're like, King Midas has an ass's ears. And it turns out that, that story gets everywhere. Everybody passes by the barber's house for some reason. And, they all hear this story about how King Midas has an ass's ears. And that's kind of the end of it. Some sources say Midas just died of old age and embarrassment because everybody knew that he had donkey's ears. And other sources say that he unalived himself out of embarrassment, which is sad. So, you know, maybe we don't all gossip about people. I think that's the lesson of that story. But, yeah, that is the end of the story of King Midas. I will say that there are a couple of different versions of that musical contest between Apollo and Pan. Sometimes it's just a satyr. Sometimes the satyr is Silenus. Sometimes it's just other satyr, insert satyr name here. But the most common variation seems to be Pan. Although, like, I don't know why Pan would care about being the best musician, because he doesn't really seem to be that fussed with being the best musician. He's the god of the wild and satyr, so, like, why would he care? But it might just be some boastful satyr-ish bragging. But also, there's some stories that just sort of end with King Midas dying of starvation because of the gold touch, and Dionysus refusing to lift the curse because it was a favor, and you can't return favors. That, you know, that was his gift to him, and it was a stupid gift, but he wished for it. So, you know, there's a little bit of a monkey's paw sort of tale here in the story of King Midas, and I just thought it was an interesting story, and I was very excited to share it because it's a fairly common story, and it's, you know, where you get the phrase about the King Midas touch. But there's not a lot, like, you don't see it as often anymore, I guess. Also, interestingly, as King of Phrygia, he was, well, as Prince of Phrygia, because the former king, King Gordius, was his adopted father, so he was the husband of Queen Cybele. And there's some accounts in sort of some Macedonian literature that King Gordius is the one who, like, drove the cart into the city that became, like, related to the Gordian knot. So if you ever heard the phrase a Gordian knot, I would recommend to go look it up. But Midas may have also been present at the time of this cart being tied up to the Gordian knot that Alexander the Great ends up showing up to cut later on. And I'm ruining the story for you guys because I'm not telling you the whole story right now. But there's some ties to that, and that's an interesting thing. Also, just interesting that King Midas is tied up to these different, like, culturally relevant phrases that stem from his like history and mythology. But yeah, that's everything I have to say, you guys. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. I will catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!